All right, welcome back, everyone, to our final session of the Guilt-Free Book Club for this spring semester. I am delighted and honored to be able to welcome the co-author of the fabulous book we've been reading all year, Learning That Matters, a field guide to course design for transformative education, Dr. Julia Metzger, who is joining us all the way from Washington State. Over in Washington State, she serves as the director of the Washington Center for Improving Undergraduate Education at the Evergreen State College. And before she moved into faculty development and the scholarship of teaching and learning, she was a chemistry professor. So really, really excited to have you here, Julia. Thank you so much for joining us. And I will turn the floor over to you really briefly if you want to introduce yourself, and then we can do a little go around.
Yeah, sounds great. So my name is Julia Metzger. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm currently the director for the Washington Center for Improving Undergraduate Education, which is a public service center. It's a very unique kind of teaching and learning center that both serves our faculty and campuses across the country. And we're at Evergreen State College in Olympia, Washington. So it's morning for me. And I also just want to apologize because this morning I learned that our roof is being replaced. And so if it gets noisy, just let me know and I'll mute.
Sounds good. So far, so good. And that has happened to me too. So I totally get it. Well, let's do a quick go around. Julia was saying that she would love to know who everyone is in the room. So why don't we do a quick go around, share your name. If you feel like sharing pronouns, you're more than welcome to, and what you're up to at Wentworth. And if there's anything in particular that you took away from the book or you really loved or sparked your curiosity or a question you have for Julia, you're welcome to share that. If not, that's totally fine too. I'm Josh Luckens here at the Teaching and Learning Collaborative at Wentworth. I'm an instructional designer, and I ask anyone who I've been hanging out next to while I'm reading the book. I'm like, this is so good. Oh my God, you have to read this. It's like these authors really have their finger, like their finger on the pulse of teaching and learning in higher ed today. So highly recommend and really glad to have you here, Julia. Let me also turn things over first to Dr. Susannah Gall, my co-host for this morning or afternoon, and she's the associate dean in the School of Sciences and Humanities. So feel free to introduce yourself, and then we'll do a quick go around from there.
Thank you, Josh, and welcome, Julia. So I'm also associate dean, but I'm also a faculty in biology. I teach biochemistry and did so last year. And I like the book in part because of the reflective nature it has of the faculty. And that relates to one of the papers I'm presenting next week tomorrow in the Education Engineering Conference. Susannah, can I pass it on to you to introduce yourself?
Absolutely, and thank you for doing that. Hello, good morning. My name is Susannah Ganavati, and I'm an associate professor in the Electrical and Computer Engineering program in the School of Engineering. I should confess that I have not read the book, although I have heard a lot about it, but especially today's topic captured my attention, and I really am looking forward to learning today. Thank you. Maybe Lauren is.
Sure. Hi, I'm Lauren Melfi. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm in the School of Computing and Data Science at Wentworth in the Applied Math program. I've read parts, not all, but I have managed to read a few parts of the book, and I'm looking forward to having you as part of the discussion, Julia, and everybody else who's here. So let's see, I'll pass it on to Betsy.
Hi, I'm Betsy Kranz. I am the director. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the director of academic assessment and program review. I've only been at Wentworth since August, but it's been a great experience so far. And we've really enjoyed the conversations that this book has kind of promoted over the last 6 months or so. It's been great. And I'll pass it on to Susan.
I'm Susan Clancy. I'm part of the advising team in the Success Studio. Josh recommended the book, so I just recently started it, and I'm looking forward to hearing more. Thank you. I'll pass it on to who haven't we heard from yet? Um, let's see. Zachary?
Hey y'all, I'm Zach. I'm a mechanical engineering major. Just finished up my freshman year. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm here because Josh invited me because I had mentioned to him that I actually went to a project-based learning school. So I'm very excited to be here and hear more about the book and everything. I guess I'll pass it on to Julia Metzger. I hope I'm pronouncing that right.
Great. I have already introduced myself, but I'll do so again, just since if people recently joined. But my name's Julia Metzger. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm one of the co-authors of the book. And if I'm tracking correctly, I think Danica is yet to go.
Sure. My name is Donica, actually Donica Buckley, and she, her. I'm a visiting assistant professor in English at Wentworth, and I'm glad it's Guilt-Free Book Club because I've not read it at all. But I was intrigued, and I have been intrigued all semester, but I have so many English students and so much grading. So I'm here today because I thought it would be interesting to learn about, and I will pick up the book over the summer. So thanks for having me. Thanks for being here, Julia. I'll pass it off to Lawrence. I don't know how he pronounces it, but
You hit it right. Hi, everyone. My name is Lawrence. I am one of the advisors for the School of Computing and Data Science. Josh invited me to the Guildford Book Club. I've read part of it, not the full thing, but what I've learned so far is definitely interesting to when I work with students to help them understand not only what the professor's coming from, but also like what they need to learn as well from their perspective. So I'm glad to be here and learn more. I'll pass it to Faith.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Faith Latrope-Moralato. I'm a professor in the School of Sciences and Humanities. I also have, unfortunately, not had an opportunity to read anything. It's finals week and I'm in the middle of a search, but very intrigued by the topic, looking forward to learning more and reading when this semester ends for me. Thank you, Julia.
Let's pass it over to Susan Marie.
Hi, I am visiting from the University of Vermont, where I'm a professor of English and also director of the Center for Teaching and Learning. And I connected with Josh earlier this year to talk about tilting assignments. And I'm also in a PodConnects group with Sarah, who invited everybody in our PodConnects group to join your guilt-free book group today. And I have to admit, I think it's a genius program idea, and I'm also glad of it because the book is on my to be read list, and I feel like this is going to be a great motivator and introduction. So thank you for letting me join you all.
You're so welcome, and thank you for being here. And also, I noticed Sarah just joined us, so welcome, Sarah. If you feel like unmuting and introducing yourself, you're more than welcome to do so.
Yes, thank you. Sorry for being a little late. I was just coming off of a really long but productive meeting this morning. And Susan Marie, we have the previous book clubs recorded, so you can watch those when you read the book and follow along. I am also an instructional designer at Wentworth and happy to see everybody here and excited to be with you all.
Fabulous. Well, thank you so much, everyone. And folks might continue joining as the afternoon progresses. I just put in the chat a link to our collaborative notes document, which you should be able to access. I will show you that as well, especially for folks perhaps watching the recording. So what you'll see is this session right here is the April 19th session, and there's a whole bunch of favorite quotes that I put in. If you have any favorite quotes, you're welcome to also. Also, if you didn't get to read, you can use it as a little cheat sheet and get a sense of some of the things in the chapter. And then at the bottom, the interactive part are key takeaways from the discussion, which you're more than welcome to fill in at any time as things strike you, and any additional resources that you might like to add to, sparked by our conversation, or you might want to access in the future based on what we talk about. So that's the collaborative notes document. If you're watching on the recording and want access to it, just email us at teach@wit.edu. So let me turn things back over to Julia Metzger, our honored guest this morning. Thanks again for being here.
Great. Well, I'm so excited to be here and, just talk to people who are, the book is out in the wild and see how it's actually being used out in the wild. And I also do love the idea of a guilt-free book club. So I was feeling a little bad when everybody was like, I must admit I haven't read any, but I think that's fine. And because I think all of these conversations are great, no matter how and when we have them, and how we're able to show up for them. So Josh asked me to just talk a little bit about the impetus of the book, the making of the book. And so I thought I'd give you just a little bit of background about me, because it's really relevant to why this book exists. So I went to Evergreen State College as an undergraduate. And if you know anything about Evergreen, it's a wildly alternative, I would say radically alternative curriculum and pedagogy. There are no grades, there are no requirements. The curriculum is all designed every year by teams of faculty who teach around an idea or a theme. And so this is kind of, this was my entry into higher education. And then I went to a very traditional graduate school in chemistry. I went to the University of Arizona. And so, the kind of juxtaposition of those two learning experiences was wild. Like, it was just really wild. But, and then I did a postdoc in England for a while. I was doing computational bioinorganic chemistry, and was flirting with the idea of taking the research track and trying to figure out, like, do I want to be an educator or do I want to be a researcher? And while I loved the research, I really didn't find as much meaning in it as I did in the teaching. So I was lucky enough to get my first job at a public liberal arts college in Georgia College. And then I've worked at liberal arts colleges exclusively in my career, which I feel really grateful for, because it is maybe the place in the traditional kind of higher education space that is at closest to Evergreen, but it's like nowhere near it, right? So I spent a lot of my teaching career trying to like sync up these incredible, wildly different, experiences. And for me, a lot of that revolved around grades. As someone who does not have a GPA, working with pre-med and pre-pharm and pre-nursing students who are like hyper GPA focused, we were just never having the same conversation, right? And so it was a real struggle early on, because I didn't know how to navigate the learning part of it, how to get that hyper focus on my GPA focused towards actually the learning piece of it. And another thing that at that time, we did have a teaching and learning center, but it was only I don't know why, and I really don't know why this is true, but the only faculty who could go to teaching and learning events had to be on the tenure track. So that was a little bit like, what? So what we I also had the really great, since there's lots of scientists in the room, I had the great opportunity early in my career. My dean put me on a team to go to Sensor. Are folks familiar with Sensor? It's a program. It stands for Science and Engineering for New Civic Engagements and Responsibilities, and it's really focused on using higher education science courses to teach about important social and critical issues. So kind of this idea of, how do we take our curriculum and weave them around the important social issues that science needs to be thinking about. So things like climate change or health crises, or, all those kinds of things. So I went with a team, and part of that is you have a little project. So we had a little project where we decided that we were going to create this like grassroots, like on the DL faculty development collective. And that's what we did. So a bunch of us got together and we just started doing faculty development for each other. And we were like, just figuring it out, you know, because like, and our whole theme was, all you need is a space and some people, right? That's all you need. And those are pretty easy things to get in the college setting. So we did that. And the way that we did it very like, we power leveled, and every time we met, a different person would present something. Could be anything, something about their teaching. And we just did this for years, and it was like amazing. And that we eventually named ourselves the Innovative Course Building Group, ICBG. And that really is the origin of this book. And so this book really is like the lessons of all those years of working together and learning how to do meaningful course design that was working for us and for our students. So so fast forward, so all four of the authors on the book were part of that group at Georgia College, but only one of them is still at Georgia College. So we've moved on, we've done other things. And, you know, for years and so that was in 2008, I think we maybe started that group. So it was a long time ago. And we always talked about wanting to write a book, right? We talked about it. And then in like 2016, we started to get kind of serious about it. I mean, you know, of course, all of this is on top of our regular jobs, right? So it took a long time to do anything. And then we started actually making book proposals in 2018, 2019. We had a couple rejected. And then we finally hit and we got our contract in the fall of 2019. This is important. And the book was due in July of 2020. So that part was like, so we're like, oh, this is so great. We're going to write a book. You know, we get started. We get all our chapters out. You know, we're like, we're just so grooving. We are just so cool writing this book. And then, you know, all of our lives went upside down because we were all educators, faculty developers. I was considered an essential worker, you know, during the transition. So, it's funny when people ask me about like, what was it like writing the book? Well, the book is so shaped by that and the kind of racial reckoning that was happening at the time. And I hope that when you get a chance to read parts of it, that you see that. Like in the first chapter, I think it's the first chapter where we sort of we work on identity, like we say very clearly what our identities are and how they might influence our writing of the book, right? That would have never happened if we weren't writing in that kind of context, but I don't think it would have occurred to us because of the ways that, you know, our own privilege works. But because we were being faced with like trying to recognize what our privilege is, we thought, oh, it's really important that we lay this out for folks. Like this is who we are. These are the experiences that we had, and these are the positionalities that we're writing from. So that's like an example of how the book was really shaped by the conditions that were happening when we were writing it. Another thing I will say is that we all live very far apart. So the book was totally written on Zoom. I mean, the hours where we're on Zoom and a Google Doc, and like, you know, being like, hey, who just did that? And that was really fun, though. It was really an amazing point of connection at a time when we were becoming so disconnected from so many people. So I really am grateful for that. So that's just a little background that I thought might be fun to hear about. The other thing that's really interesting about this, and I have yet to go back and look at any of them, is that all of those meetings are recorded. So we actually have the archive of all the conversations that we've had about the book, which I'm looking forward to going back to someday, for memory's sake. But the other thing that Josh asked me is like, how did we, what were sort of our intents around the book? And I think like one thing, if you've read pieces of it, or when you do read it, that I hope really comes through, is that this book is about community. It's about course design, it's practical, all of those things, but it is really about like, we're encouraging people to build community around their work as educators. And we try and be a little prescriptive at points, like grab a person, right, and have a conversation, because we really want, I mean, I think at the core, we all believe that learning is a social activity, and that it's amazing when you get a group of people together to have conversations about things that matter to them, just how on fire that can get. And so that is really our intent. We also tried to walk the line of like, who might be who might be our audiences, and we were really trying to have two audiences. The first primary audience is faculty who are designing courses for students, and I would say in undergraduate, not that it couldn't be used in other places, but we, that's what we did, and so that's what we wrote about. But then we also had this like meta audience of faculty developers and people who were mentoring faculty in course design. And so we tried to walk those two lines, and we had a lot of conversations about that, because it was not a super easy thing to figure out. And I don't know if we mastered it, but we did okay, I would say. Let's see. The other thing, the thing that I'll just end this little bit with is, what was really important to me was that, coming out of that belief that learning is a social endeavor, is that humanity and people's humanity really comes through as like an important high value, is recognizing people's humanity as like a baseline, right? And when we're kind of doing learning and teaching work. And when we start to think about, okay, well, what does that really mean? One of the things that we contended a lot with was the ways in which what I'll say normative education, I don't know, like the ways in which education is operationalized in the United States is pretty dehumanizing. And we get inculcated into that without even realizing it's happening, right? And so one of the things that we were really trying to do is take those blinders off and think about, like, how do we recenter the humans in this endeavor we call education? And so I wanted to ask you to do a little bit of a reflection. And this, I'm drawing this from the Supporting Students chapter, which I think is chapter 9. Yeah. And I'll say, like, I think chapter 9 and 10 are my favorite, although it's like having favorite children. I don't really know if I'm supposed to do that. But the reason why I like these two chapters is because they're really just like leaning in on the humans in the system and thinking about the humans in the system. So chapter 9 is really centering the students as humans, and chapter 10 is really centering you, like the educators, as humans. So really recognizing that you're all part of an important learning ecosystem, and that your humanity is like critically important in order to do this work well. So one thing I as I was kind of flipping through these was thinking about one thing that we cannot get away from is the ways that our brains work in order to create biases. And one thing that I'm really interested in is like releasing ourselves from the shame of this by understanding that our brains are incredibly effective pattern makers. Like that's what they do. See patterns sometimes where they are not, right? Like that's how our brains work. And they do it to shortcut, right? Because there's no way that we could take in all the stimuli of the world if we didn't have shortcuts in order to think about how we navigate the world, right? And so the biases come out of this very natural, normal thing, right? And so in order for us to like start to recognize those biases and maybe unpack and do something about them, we have to let ourselves off the hook for having them in the first place. Because if we don't do that, it's going to be super, super hard to do that. So here's the prompt that I want to ask you. And there's a little bit of this, you'll read about it in the first part of chapter 9, where we give you a little bit of cases. But I just want you to think about a time when you have made a judgment about a person. Could be a student, could be a family member, could be a friend, could be a colleague. And you made a judgment, an assumption about that person, and then you later realize that that assumption was absolutely wrong. So I'm just going to give you a couple of minutes to think about a moment when this happened to you. And I apologize for all the noise. Okay, I know that probably wasn't enough time, but I want to add to the prompt a little bit. And that is, what did you feel when you first realized that you'd made this judgment about someone in error? And then to deepen that even more, did you do anything about it?
I felt a little like regretful, kind of like blinded. I felt like I was kind of stupid for not like picking up on clues earlier as to who this person was.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. So like that kind of like shame pattern, right? It's really common when this happens, right? And then sometimes that can move into defensiveness. So did anyone have that feeling? Yep, I'm seeing some nods.
There's this back and forth of not wanting to make excuses for myself, but at the same time, not wanting other people to think that I'm bad because I made this mistake.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I just think this is like an incredibly valuable exercise to think about, like when you're trying to think about centering humans, because particularly those of you who are teaching, classes of many people, your brain, right? Like that, like, so if you have more than 20 students in a class, right, your brain is trying to make those shortcuts for you because it's a lot to keep track of, right? It's a lot of humans, and you're also trying to, deal with content and all kinds of things, right? And so, like, that's a space that's really ripe for this kind of judgment era thing to happen without you really even paying attention to it, right? And so I think the very first step is recognizing in yourself what it feels like when you know you've done it, so that you can when you come across it again, you can take action about it, right? And I'll just say, like, the one that I maybe have the most shame about is, like, one of my best friends in the whole wide world now was a colleague when I was a younger professor. And I thought she was so annoying. I was like, I cannot believe I have to work with this person. And you know, it's funny because I think, like, I was like, for a longest time, I was like, I just am going to stay away from her. I don't want anything to do with her. But then the moment where I kind of let myself get to know her, I was like, oh man, she's not like that at all. And that was all me. Right. And I think back to that a lot in terms of thinking about, like, how important the relationships are in learning, right? And I think, like, if you, I don't know if you've all read Felton and Lambert's Relationship Rich book, but that's another really, really good read if you're looking for more reads to add to your list.
It's actually one of our previous semester's book club books. So if you feel like you can check out the recordings, and it's available online through our library because we had it as part of our book club. I see that we're about halfway through our session, so I definitely want to give Susannah Gall a chance to ask a couple questions. And also what I'd love to do is introduce this resource that Julia and I were looking at together last week when we met. I just put a link in the chat, and it is a course design template. So maybe before we transition over to a question from Susannah, Julia, you can walk us through a little bit, and if you want to share your screen, you're more than welcome to share to do so. This is a very practical resource that the authors of the book have put together. There's actually a lot of resources like this on their website, although those are both in the collaborative notes document under additional resources. But this is kind of using some of the wisdom from the book in terms of actually how you could use it to design your course. So let's take a quick look at that together.
Yeah, I don't have the power to share my screen, but if you want to share it, I could walk through it.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Yeah. Yeah. Well, share. Let's see. I'll do that. And I will change you to light mode so that you don't look like a zombie.
Oh my gosh.
In the photographs. Yeah, it's always interesting how that comes out. But yeah.
Yeah, so I just I use this in our course design institute, and use it in workshops and whatnot. And this is really just a course design template that we created to accompany the book. So if you scroll down a little bit, I can walk you through kind of the things. So it really starts off, you know, as you might think, like the nuts and bolts of your class. And if you keep going, you'll see that, like, for example, in that learner profile, if that it references the chat exercises in the chapter. So this is almost like a companion to the book if you're using it to design a course. And also, I would say, if you just want to pick and choose parts of the book in support of course design, you could start here and move through this, which I hope is self-explanatory, but I also welcome all your feedback about how to make it better. But you could use this as a way to move through move through the book and identify pieces of the book that you might want to read. And so it goes through the kind of what I would say is like a modified backward design. So thinking about what your vision for the course is, thinking about the learning outcomes, and then as you keep going, and then the modification part of it is that we actually have you start thinking about who you are as an educator, and then moving on to thinking about, you know, what are the dilemmas, issues, and questions that are driving your content. And so this is actually that piece, the DIQ piece, is kind of where the sensor stuff comes in, which is like, think about your content rather than marching through textbook chapters, think about how you could organize it around essential questions or dilemmas, issues, or questions that can help theme and create a narrative for students about the content. So then just moving through the learner outcomes, and then it goes, this is really the kind of thing that comes out of chapter 9, which is like, what can learners anticipate in terms of support? And I like this piece in particular because it's really explicit, and then you can put it in your syllabus, and so you're being very transparent about what's available to students. And then it moves into learning activities, assessments, and performance tasks. And then, as you can see, we'll bounce you back to parts of the chapters, and then thinking about developing a teaching philosophy. And then the last thing that I want to, if you keep scrolling, this is the thing that I really wanted to point out is some tables to help you maybe map out your course design. I find these incredibly useful ways to think about when you're trying to design a new course or redesign a course, to really look at it in terms of aligning learning outcomes with the resources, the readings, and the activities, and the assessments, and asking yourself these questions maybe before you dig in too deeply into the content can really help you create a course that has a really nice learning and narrative arc to it. So that's that. This is another way of mapping outcomes, so that these are the last two kind of tables of that. But I hope you use that, and let me know how it goes.
Thank you so much. It's one thing I love about the book is it has both the philosophical, as Julia started, and also the practical, as we've now seen. So it kind of contains both of those. And I want to ask Susannah Gall if you have any questions, or also if you want to share anything about your thoughts on how these types of frameworks might tie into some of the work that we've been doing together around blueprinting and supporting adjunct faculty as they come in and have to teach courses on sometimes little notice.
Right. Thank you, Josh, and thank you, Julia. So, and some of you are maybe more experienced in the room with this than I am, but Julia, about half of the instructors in the School of Sciences and Humanities are adjuncts, and some of them are brought in at the last minute. And so, in order to better support them, with the help of the Teaching and Learning Collaborative, we developed these blueprints that are basically the course set up with subject matter experts. And we've done now 7 or 8. I think we've got a couple more in the pipeline. And so I need, and they've been used for many of them have been used for just under a year. So we need to do some assessment, but I think that speaks, and I think this is what Josh is getting at. What's the reality, the humanity of the instructors, and how can we make a support for them and make it better for our students? And so that was the one thing. But I'd like to also expand a little bit on the student-centered, student engagement kind of approach. The one faculty member that was here for a little bit, Donica, I visited her English 2 class. So for us, that's a literature-based kind of class. And, lots of great literature that one can put in there. But the class that I visited, she had the students she was moving into the World War II, World War I era writing. She had the students each bring in pictures of the World War I or II monuments from their hometown and give a little bit of a sense for where that is, how they interact, what do they and I guess it really spoke to me. The students were engaged, number one. There were lots of visuals. They were sharing ideas. It spoke to their humanity, their uniqueness. One was international, so he had, of course, a different perspective. But I wonder how much we miss some of the value of engaging our students in creative, unique student-centered ways. And that relates to again to the paper that I'm presenting tomorrow a bit. But I wonder if you, and I'm sure my colleagues have wonderful other examples of that, but I think that's a piece that sometimes we get nervous about giving away, faculty giving away the control that way. So, because you don't know what's going to happen. So I wonder if you have any comments or.
Yeah, well, I would love to know what other people's experience with that are, but my comments would be the we ended the book with these principles of emergent strategy that are, I don't know, something that I always return to. But my thing here, because the things that you're talking about are really about like centering the humans, right? And I just think this one is coming to mind, which is trust the people. If you trust the people, they become trustworthy. And my thought about it is that I never have done that and been disappointed, right? Like I feel like the students that I've worked with have always risen to the occasion when I've given them the opportunity and just come up with things that were just, completely novel to me, right? And so I was learning from them as well. But I do understand, because I feel it myself, this like sense of this is my control space, right? And I'm in charge of it. They put me in charge of it. Therefore, I better, and like to really rethink that and democratize what's happening in the classroom is quietly radical in terms of how a lot of our education works, right?
So maybe Zachary, if you do you have any experience with a classroom that's quote out of control or less structured, and how does that engage you or make you feel?
I'm sorry, can you rephrase the question? I'm not sure I totally
Sure.
understand.
No. So often the traditional faculty standing in front of the room, here's what you need to know, and hopefully there'll be some questions and back and forth. But what another strategy that some people use in classrooms is discussions or student-led, ideas. And what Julie and I are just mentioning is that can make the faculty member feel a little out of control. And so I'm just sort of curious what if you've had any experience like that, so non-faculty, leading a lecture experience, and what it felt like from your perspective as a student.
Yeah, I've had some experiences with that. I actually had one class in high school where it was kind of like very self-led by all the students. Like we all just kind of picked our own projects and worked in our own directions. And yeah, we generally did have these experiences where, yeah, it felt like the students were in control, but didn't really like have the motivation or the skill to like really keep the ball rolling, really keep on any sort of track. But
So
then
what was the
again,
role of the faculty member then?
to try to corral us, but then again, like it's kind of a balancing act of how do you keep kids kind of like on track while letting them find their own path. Yeah, I don't
Thank
know if
you.
that.
Yeah, I mean that gives me or gives us a sense of that.
Can I ask a follow-up question? I know we talked about like your high school being project-based and Wentworth kind of purports to be hands-on project-based, but I just want to ask you to like compare your experiences in, classes that have really been hands-on and really been like very engaging for you, both high school and college, and what's kind of the difference that you're seeing between the undergrad experience and your maybe more like high school that maybe ran a little bit more like Evergreen State rather than a more traditional school setting?
I'd say like the main difference I've noticed is that it's harder to incorporate project-based learning like ideology within a college setting simply because of how college settings are inherently like split up into different classes. In a high school setting, you can easily have like 3 or 4 classes that just kind of mix everything together. With a college class, you have specific guidelines that you need to meet for every class, so it's harder to make it a little more homogenous. That's at least that's the main difference I've noticed. I have had some great experiences with like project-based learning ideologies already within like just some beginning engineering courses. You know, the ideas of like being able to bring our own passions in and make projects a little more like unique to us. But then again, it's harder to have on like a larger scale.
Thanks for sharing that. Yeah. And Julia, do you have what advice would you have for college educators who would like to bring more project and project-based learning, problem-based learning that you talk about in the book into their classrooms in a variety of disciplines? I know we have engineers and mathematicians and English faculty currently in the room.
Yeah. Well, I would say, do start small and be as wildly creative as you can. I think like for me, when I finally gave myself permission to teach in this way, which was moving away from like lecture exam, and to we eventually just did our entire intro chemistry sequence to be around themes, and we chose kind of the environment as our theme, but and then we never gave another exam. And when we finally did that, it was amazing, right? Because it was so much more fun for me and for the students. And like it was, I mean, the way that I think of it is that like we went from a very joyless activity to a very joy-filled activity, and the learning was really happening. So, but I also really try like the experience of coming from Evergreen, where everything's team done and there's no requirements, and it's a real playground, to coming to like probably what you're experiencing, Zach, is that very structured, department based, discipline based curriculum. I was always trying to figure out ways to get around the structure without like taking on the energy of trying to break the structure, I would say. And so one things that we would do when we started this group is we would have cross course projects. Like we weren't team teaching, our classes didn't meet at the same time. It was just like I would sync up with a math professor, and we would like have the students working on the same project, and they would like meet outside of class to work on these projects together. So it didn't require any big structural changes, but we were able to kind of bring in that interdisciplinary in really interesting ways, build those relationships, have people think about how the math and the chemistry connect with one another. And then in times I was more lucky and I got to team teach with someone where we figured it out that the classes could be taught at the same time, so that then we could just get a big room and play around with those structures. But I think like doing things like that that are not super logistically challenging will bring a lot of like joy and ideas, and just being in those collision spaces, I feel like helps with that kind of project creativity. And the other thing that I think that Zachary really elucidated is like it is a change in identity for the educator. And that's one thing you got to pay attention to, because you're moving from a space of like, I own the content, to a space of like, I am with you doing coaching, like trying to facilitate your engagement with the content. And that is a little bit where you let up your control. Parker Palmer writes really beautifully about this. And I think where this idea of like, what is the object? And so in a lot of traditional, and I want to say American and European because it's not true everywhere, but a lot of traditional classrooms, the object is the learned educator. And he talks about reframing the object as the question, right? Or the topic that you're all engaging with together. And to me, that's a great metaphor for building a learning community, a community of learners, which includes the faculty. I don't know if that's
So I
helpful.
just wanted to reiterate that, and great that you had your colleagues that want to work with you. That's not always the case, one. And I've been in classrooms or taught where I tried to do some of those things and the students are resistant because they're not used to it. And so how does, that transition? But maybe Lauren or Afsani can speak to their discipline, math and engineering, and how they might see or have done some of these things, how they feel.
Well, I mean, I was going to say that I think part of the segmentation of the college atmosphere is not just disciplinary, although that's certainly true. It's not just that, it's also within each chunk in the sequence. Math is a very hierarchical field when it comes to, oh, you're going to do Calc 1, then you're going to do Calc 2, then you're going to do this next one. And so, it's the classic, I have a harder time figuring out how to implement such and such technique because I have to make sure that I cover the prerequisite material for the next course type argument. That makes it harder to have the flexibility. And I'm not saying impossible. I just haven't completely figured it out for myself yet in some sense. What I feel like I've encountered in some fashion with that kind of more open-ended, how can I connect this to other things in my courses is the question of scope. Because the more when I leave things open-ended to let's connect it to something that my students are interested in, I feel like I commonly get the two extremes. I either get, I'm really interested in this thing and it's super, super complicated and it's like way beyond what we or they are ready to do in the context of the course that we're working with. Or they are, the math is scary, so I'm not going to push myself on the math. I'm going to just take the itty bitty tiny step of maybe this is something else that it relates to, but not able to really use that as well as a growth opportunity. So that's where I feel like I sit with some of the open-ended project style work that I've given to my students in the math classroom. I am trying, one of the things that I've been trying to do to help with that is work on how the rubrics for those kinds of projects are posed, so that we can be more open-ended about how you meet those objectives, as well as clear about what they're aiming for. But it's been something that I am still working on.
Thank you, Lauren. I want to say that we have about 5 minutes left. So in the collaborative notes document, there's a space at the bottom for key takeaways. There's already a few in there, but feel free to add yours in the rest of the time that we have. I'd love to see some of our collective ideas made visible. One thing I want to point out is that the first thing really, this big question of how to recenter humans in education. It's wonderful to have these big questions, and the book has very specific strategies that you can implement in your classroom tomorrow for ways to do that. So check out chapter 9 in particular has a bunch of those, but throughout the book, there's a lot of different, practical applications, and some of them are going to work better for you than others, but they are there. It's not just a philosophical book. It is both. While you're doing that and thinking about your key takeaway, I'm going to ask Julia one last question. to kind of take us home. And that question comes from a quote you share in the last chapter of the book, chapter 10, by Paulo Freire, who says that what the educator does in teaching is to make it possible for the students to become themselves. To make it possible for the students to become themselves. So I thought that was really interesting because the book's title is, of course, talking about transformative education. So then there's this idea of like, what is the transformation? The transformation that's happening is within each individual student as they become more and more themselves through their deepening study of whatever the discipline is. So I thought that was a fascinating way of looking at it. And I'd love to hear your thoughts more about that philosophically, but I would love to hear really is an anecdote about either a student or a faculty member that you have worked with who you saw become more deeply themselves through the course of your work together, when you saw this transformation happen, according to Freire's idea, through some of the work you did together. So that'd be our concluding question for you.
Thanks. That is such a great question. And I'm actually going to connect this back to what Lauren was talking about. But so and I had an immediate student come to mind, and so it all feels like it's fitting together. But so I had a student who was a chemistry major. This was many, many years ago. Really struggled all the classes, and a lot of it was about the math. To the point of where I think he was in the process of being counseled out of the major, but he was a very persistent student. So he was not taking well to the counseling out. But so he got into one of my classes, and I actually, this was like one of my first years teaching upper division, and I did that class all project based, where where the point was that they were taking ownership. So this was like a laboratory class. So they had like a menu of things they could choose from, or they could create their own things that they were doing. And the thing that was just amazing is that he turned into a totally different student in that environment. And the key was, turns out that he wasn't that good at like being told what to do. Right? So which I can relate to, because I'm also not that good at that. But the point being that when he finally had the chance to take agency and ownership over his education and move and like make decisions about which directions he was going to take, he really like moved into himself, and it was just a key that nobody had unlocked for him. And it's not like I intentionally did it. I had no idea that was going to happen. But I think like, so it's like a mix of like providing opportunities for people and luck, right? And I think that, and fast forward now, he's like a chief chemist at Nike. And I mean, like it's a miracle story, because we were so hard on him, saying you've got to find a different major because this one's not for you. And who knew that actually it was totally for him, and we just weren't presenting him with the learning opportunities and ways that were going to work for him.
That's a really inspiring story. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. It really ties into one of my key takeaways from chapter 9, which is we talked about at the beginning of this session, which was just the limits of our perception and our biases and the ways that our lenses are fogged. We're not able to know, the underlying motivation of what's happening for every student in the room. And so if we're able to kind of release some of those judgments and design our courses with more universal access and allowing a lot more kind of ways to succeed in the course, you'll get a lot more students succeeding in ways that surprise you and you wouldn't have even known were happening or were possible. And throughout the book, there were all these reflections by all the authors, including yourself, about moments like that you had in the classroom where you were just amazed when you invited students to reflect, you invited students to share and they share things that, really changed your perception and really helped open up new pathways for what, you consider possible in the classroom. So thank you so much for all the inspiration throughout the chapter, throughout this session, and throughout the times that we've gotten to meet. Definitely hope to, continue to stay connected with you. And if folks want to reach out to you, how might they do so?
I'll put my email in the chat here, and that is the best way to get a hold of me.
Well, Julia, thank you so much once again for your being so generous with your time and this fabulous book. And it's just been such a joy to spend the year with you, virtually through your words, and now, virtually in real time.
It was really great. So thank you all. Do reach out. I love to know how people are using the book. It's always a joy to know.
I hope you take a lot of joy in knowing that this learning community has, centered around your great work and fabulous advice to educators. And thanks everyone for joining us. It's been a pleasure having you, and we hope you'll join us for our summer pop-up. We're probably going to do one on belonging in the classroom. So that will be fun, and I'm sure I'll reach out to Julia for her favorite resources on that topic as well. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great afternoon. Bye.
Bye.